Welcome everyone to the side event on the IPCC Cross-Chapter Paper 5. We'll be starting very shortly, so we'll just give colleagues another minute or two to settle in and come in, and we'll get started soon after. Thanks. Okay, welcome everyone. We'll get the side event underway. Welcome to this Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Cross-Chapter Paper 5 Mountains, sharing knowledge to promote adaptation initiatives in mountains. This side event has been put together under the framework of the Mountain Partnership, and we very much welcome the opportunity to have this panel to discuss how we go beyond the recommendations and the key findings of the IPCC report in relation to the issues that are faced in mountain regions, and how to extend also a science policy dialogue on those matters. So this particular session will start with an overview of the cross-chapter paper Mountains, just to cover some of the key aspects. And this will be presented by me, Carolina Adler, as Executive Director of the Mountain Research Initiative, but also IPCC lead author in the sixth assessment. We are also joined here by a panel of experts, primarily from the civil society and NGO communities and practitioners who bring experience also in linking scientific findings with policy. So we have here Mirela Gallardo, the co-director of the Mountain Institute. We are also joined by Sam Kanimibwa, the Chief Executive Officer of the Albertine Rift Conservation Society, ARCOS. We are also joined by Geeta Pandey, the manager at the Kanali Integrated Rural Development and Research Center, and also by Eric Fongo, who's the co-founder of the International Center for Environmental Education and Community Development. So to get the session started, I will switch presentations just so that we can go through an overview of the key findings of the IPCC report. So I'm just getting my slides up. And before I get started, I would also like to give a warm welcome to those of you who are joining us online. I understand that this session is also being broadcast live on YouTube on the channels designated through the COP, so we very much enjoy your company as well from the virtual space. So the IPCC Cross-Chapter paper, Mountains 5, it's part of what's been a compilation of reports as part of the 6th assessment. And mountains were specifically mentioned in 2 of those reports. There was a special report on the ocean and cryosphere with a chapter on high mountain areas, which was endorsed by the panel in 2019. And of course the cross-chapter paper Mountains, which was published earlier this year in February following the approval session with the panel in February 2022. And it's important to also recognize that there's still an opportunity to continue highlighting some of the key evidence that we've assessed around mountains within the synthesis report, which will be the final volume, if you like, that will be part of the 6th assessment, which is expected in February 2023. And we would like to invite those that have the opportunity to engage in the approval session as well to highlight those topics there. And one key aspect to mention here is that mountains have not had a position or location within an assessment report like this for almost close to 30 years. So it's been quite some time since we've had the opportunity to highlight mountains within the IPCC. And just to give you a very brief overview of the report by numbers, the Working Group 2 report had over 270 authors, 8 of which were then designated to create the synthesis within the cross-chapter paper Mountains. We also covered 10 nationalities within the author team and a spread of roughly 20 to 80% rather, between developing country and developed country representation. We also had 25% women represented as co-authors, as well as 75% men, and a team of an amazing interdisciplinary researchers from around the world, 27 contributing authors who were also fundamental in making sure that the evidence and the assessment that support the conclusions within the cross-chapter paper Mountains could be brought forward. So their contribution and input to this is absolutely welcomed and very much appreciated. We also had the opportunity to review more than 500 scientific papers that have been published specifically on mountains and climate change. And with that, we also addressed more than 2,000 review comments that were received as part of the formal process within the IPCC for the first draft and also the second draft and the final draft with governments. So there's been considerable input and participation also from experts and practitioners in helping to shape and substantiate these conclusions. So to all of them, a very huge thanks as well for those efforts and involvement on mountains. So just to give you a brief overview, this comes from the cross-chapter paper Mountains. This is the first figure where we outline the scope of the assessment we carried out. So this is about quantifying also the extent of mountain area that we covered within the assessment. And in this report, we look at approximately 25% of the global land surface being mountainous, with a total of 1.28 billion people residing within those mountain regions. So it's a considerable portion of the global population that not only depends on, but also is affected by the impacts that are experienced in mountain regions. But not only within mountain regions, but also increasingly further downhill. So some of the key observed climate change impacts that are summarized within the cross-chapter paper, it comes down to the fact that even now, at 1.15 degrees Celsius, we are already seeing an attribution to climate change, and this has certainly been increasing. in many mountain regions with serious consequences for people and ecosystems. 2/3 of irrigated agriculture depends on water from mountains. So water is a theme that has come across in our evidence quite strongly. And changes in that water availability, especially impacting seasonally dry regions. We also see seasonality coming through in terms of tourism and other livelihood options that are very present within mountains. For example, those tourism activities that depend on snow or other types of mountain attributes. And finally, the exposure to climate-related hazards. This is also something that's coming very strongly in the evidence assessed, not least through, for example, flash floods, landslides that are contributing to an increase in what we see in disasters as well. And this is affecting a growing number of people in mountain regions, but as I said earlier, also further downstream. And this report really highlights also the links between what happens in the mountains and also how it affects in a cascading impact sense further downstream, which also underscores the importance to look at these issues in a very systemic and comprehensive way, because what happens in the mountains doesn't stay in the mountains, it affects all of us. So with increasing temperature, we'll continue to see changes in mountain regions throughout the 21st century, with expected negative consequences for mountain cryosphere, biodiversity, ecosystem services, and human well-being evident throughout. So some of the projected impacts that we can expect at 1.5 degree and beyond. Many glacier loss and cryosphere loss in many mountains, especially in low elevation mountainous regions. In tropical and mid-latitude mountains, we can expect to see a 50% ice volume lost under low emission scenarios, but 2/3 or even more than that lost under high emission scenarios by the end of the century. So we are definitely tracking within scenarios that are not looking very promising for prospects in mountain regions. And the strongest impacts that we see are projected to occur in glacier and snow melt dependent regions, for instance in Central Asia, South Asia, Western South America and Southwest North America. And a large proportion of endemic mountain species are also at an increased risk of extinction beyond 1.5, even under what's called undershoot scenarios. So this is also something to consider very prominently in how we address those risks going forward. And speaking of risks, the cross-chapter paper assessed quite a large number of volume of evidence on this, and it comes down to condensing them to four key risks that we've identified in mountains. Number one is on hazards and the loss of lives and harm to people and damage to infrastructure that is associated with those hazards, particularly hazards such as landslides and floods. The second key risk we've identified is the adverse impacts to livelihoods and risks to economic sectors, both for mountain communities and in the lowlands, and particularly from changes in water availability and how that's managed. So it's important to also underscore the importance of water as one of that common theme that links mountains also all the way to the lowlands. And changes to mountain ecosystems is a third key risk that we've identified, with risks, as I mentioned earlier, to mountaintop species extinction also evident. One fourth key risk is on the intangible losses and harms to people and loss of cultural value associated with a decline in the cryosphere in terms of ice, snow cover, and the warming, as well as increase in disasters. This is also a new aspect that we've come to address in the sixth assessment, those intangible and cultural values associated with those losses. And this is also something that we are increasingly seeing evident in the mountain space. So to conclude or to wrap up this particular summary, it's evident from what we've assessed that the current speed, scope and depth of adaptation in mountains is unfortunately insufficient to address those future risks that we see in the horizon, particularly at higher warming levels, these meaning beyond 1.5. We've already experienced a considerable extent of impacts at 1.1 degrees today, so this is certainly something to take into account. And therefore, climate resilient development is already challenging at current warming levels, and the prospects will become even further limited if warming exceeds 1.5 and may not even be possible in warming beyond 2 degrees, which is one of the key arguments and evidence presented not just for mountain regions, but also in small islands and also in the polar regions. So it is important to recognize that mountains is also part of those systems that are at the moment very much threatened by those risks. However, we have some opportunities and prospects to address these risks. And one of the things that has come through in the evidence we've assessed is that the regional cooperation and the transboundary governance in mountain regions, which is supported by multi-scale and multi-stakeholder knowledge networks and monitoring programs, enable, in fact, long-term adaptation actions, where risk transcends boundaries and jurisdictions. So for us in the mountain context, it's important to take these risks and adaptation options at a mountain scale, meaning transcending boundaries. So cooperation and coordination at the mountain relevant scales is key for us to address. There are also increasing calls for more ambitious climate action in mountains, providing impetus for stronger cooperation within and across mountain regions and downstream areas. And one of the key stakeholder groups, of course, that are part of this conversation is not only practitioners, but also the communities that are affected in those regions. So the scientific community plays a role, but also many others within those mountain landscapes. And with that, I will wrap up my input and we'll take my seat across over here and we'll continue across with the if I can get this slide back up, here we go, with the panel session. So as I said, the scientific evidence is quite clear as to what the impacts are and what the risks we're facing, but how we address them is important to engage also civil society and NGOs, practitioners and communities on the ground to see how that is addressed. So we'll have the opportunity now to go through that conversation with the esteemed panelists that we have here today to join us. So now taking my seat with my esteemed panelists, I have the opportunity now to go through each one. We have prepared a number of questions for all of them to reflect also from their perspective and their experiences and what are the types of implementation and actions that they are undertaking in their daily work. They have very fascinating insights to also share with us. To make sense of how we then address climate change going forward in a mountain context. So I'll invite each of the panelists to go through those questions and we'll do one round of questions before turning to the second round of questions. So let me just start with Mirela Gallardo, who's the co-director of the Mountain Institute. Just to introduce a little bit about Mirela, she is the current co-director of the Institute, Mountain Institute, and she has experience in planning and implementation of rural development projects in various localities in Peru, and has also cooperated with Colombia environmental ministries, sharing lessons about multiple projects that have been undertaken by the Mountain Institute. And among the topics covered in her work are the co-management of natural protected areas, the design and implementation of irrigation projects, and roads in rural areas with development of hydrological studies and land use planning. So, Mirela, I have a few questions for you, but let me start with the first question. How does the Mountain Institute, who is working with communities in the Andes, how do you use ecosystem-based adaptation approaches, and what have been some of the key outcomes of that engagement?
Thank you, Carolina, and good morning, everyone. The El Instituto de Montaña, it's now called, it's a Peruvian organization, and we work with communities in the Andes, basically with a participatory approach. Ecosystem-based adaptation is one of the topics of us working with communities, and we approach them asking them to do an assessment with the community altogether, bringing technical specialists from universities, researchers, and working together with the local knowledge. In that process, we do climate risk assessment as well. That ends with the design of an EBA measure, ecosystem-based adaptation measure or project that is a priority of the community that replies to their needs. In this process, we have a dialogue between traditional knowledge and technical knowledge. And this kind of approach also takes in consideration the community needs that helps or contributes to build sustainability. There are their needs, is their leadership, is their ownership. The implementation goes in the same direction. We work together, community invest also, workforce, the project has the resources, and we also try to monitor this. Results are very interesting because communities know how to manage their resources, but these changes in the climate are also doing their part. For example, stations or climate stations like rainy season and dry season are not being the same. Frosts are a very important thing. It affects a lot crops and pastures. We work with communities from 3,000 meters above sea level and up, and frosts are impacting a lot the pastures. I haven't seen in the report the thing of the frost. Of course, there are landslides, there are floods, but for livelihoods, this is also an important matter, as well as the failure of water. That's the way we work with them.
Thank you very much for that input, and indeed the community has a very good knowledge of what works under their conditions, and it's great to hear that through the EBA interventions that you lead, there is opportunity and space for that dialogue and input to be taken into consideration right from the start. That is a very good news and a great example of how we should be engaging also with indigenous and local knowledge as part of that. Thank you for that input, and we'll come back for the second question in a moment. Sam, how are you? Very good.
Very well, thanks.
So Sam is the Chief Executive Officer at ARCOS, as I introduced before. He has led the organization since 2009 and is professionally qualified conservationist with over 30 years experience in conservation at the international level and particularly in Africa. Sam has long experience with governments, NGOs and private sector engagement at local, national and international level, and has been involved in several policy processes at the international level as well. With over 100 staff under Sam's leadership, ARCOS is one of the key organisations active in shaping biodiversity conservation and ecosystem restoration, as well as community development in the Albertine Rift region and the hub for sustainable mountain development in Africa. So Sam, we have also a few questions for you, but I would like to start with the first question. So ARCOS links and coordinates a network of mountain actors across Africa and particularly East Africa. So in your experience, how does this regional cooperation assist with knowledge management?
Yeah, thank you, Carolina, and good morning, everybody. I think this event is great, particularly that we are celebrating the International Year of Mountains as decided by the UN, the General Assembly. So thank you for coming. ARCOS, the Albertine Rift Conservation Society, as Carolina said, is a regional organization. And for over 10 years now, we have been promoting networking, information sharing, capacity building in Africa on mountains, sustainable mountain development agenda. And when I see the transformation we have gone through, all is based on information, learning from each other. And even today, when I see what is going on at the COP, I think most of the people are interested to come and learn from each other and see what is going on, and this is transformational. At ARCOS, we have organized different events from the World Mountain Forum to regional forum in Africa, but also at local level. My organization, as the name says, it is the Albertine Rift Conservation Society, and our main focus is the Albertine Rift region, which is the Central Eastern Africa region, which is a mountainous region, but we have also programs beyond this region, like in Africa, African mountains. Now, the information is critical to guide the decision making, to guide actions. And when I see the IPCC report, as the summary was presented at the beginning, is quite rich information you can't get, but when you read and you see what is going on, actually it calls for more action and action today. So in East Africa, we have compiled adaptation solutions covering all 6 countries in East Africa for mountain adaptation solutions. We were amazed to see the amount of actions to try to address climate change by different communities, different levels. And the compiled booklet is now available online, and we are now working with East African community to see how we can streamline climate change adaptation in different countries. We have now, in collaboration with UNEP, Grid Arendal, East African communities, and the countries in the region, we are now have established the East Africa Climate Change Technical Working Group, and this technical group, we are now working under this group to establish the mountain adaptation thematic working group. And this is to show how, from the information you can get, you can actually reach to the point where you can not only influence action by experience sharing, observation, but also reach to the point of mainstreaming in the policy agenda. Secondly, we are next month, at the occasion of the International Mountain Day, bringing together over 200 mountain community enterprises in Africa. And we'll have a meeting in Kigali where mountain communities who are the champions of change, who are suffering but also trying to do the best they can, we are bringing them together to offer this platform for exchange and learning. We have done this at the level of the Albertine Rift region, and this is the first time we are going to do this for Africa. But what we have seen when we did it before is how fascinating to see these mountain communities, even if they don't speak the same language. They are so enthusiastic, so happy to learn. And when you do it the next time, you hear good stories, how what they have seen has actually influenced their behavior, their activities. So information and sharing information is critical for change at local level and even at the policy level.
Thank you very much, Sam. Fantastic. And it's great to see that indeed one of the things that we found within the context of what we did in the IPCC is the fact that there's already a considerable amount of adaptation implementation going on in the regions. And as you pointed out, it's important to harness that input and experiences learned so that they can continue to be part of the basis of information that continues to be built upon and not reinvent wheels going forward, right? And indeed, the networked approach is something that is very important to consider as well. So well done to you and your team. And also the adaptation solutions for East Africa is something that we look forward to making sure that we make reference to as well in future. Right, so now I'm turning my attention to our third panelist, Gita Pandey, who is the manager at the Kanali Integrated Rural Development and Research Center. And Gita has more than 10 years experience working in development sector with a focus on advocacy, campaigns, human rights-based approach to development, climate change, gender, and inequality issues. So currently, Pandey is associated with the Kanali Integrated Rural Development and Research Center in Nepal as the Environment, Climate Change and Advocacy Manager, and is also convening various civil society networks and alliances. So this is a very interesting perspective for us to look into. So Pandey, we also have questions for you. And I would like to, first of all, start by asking, in what ways have mountains been included in policy development in Nepal? From your experience, how have you seen that being reflected in policy?
Thank you so much, Carolina. Government of Nepal and the civil society, together with the other multilateral and bilateral organizations in Nepal, they have been trying hard to include the mountain in the policy development process within the country and as well as in the global arena, as we all are aware that how difficult it is to pitch the agenda of the mountain in the global negotiations process, even in the scope as well. So Nepal government, together with the civil society organization, they are trying very hard. In 2009, Government of Nepal initiated, the Mountain Alliance Initiative as a political bloc for the UNFCCC negotiation process. It proposed the Mountain Alliance Initiative. That was the major policy decision of the Government of Nepal, making the coalition of the mountainous country for the negotiation process to put forward the mountain agenda. And it was also taken as one of the policy milestone led by Nepal in that context. And as a follow-up of that Mountain Alliance Initiative after 2009, in 2012, again the Government of Nepal, together with the stakeholders, organized one international conference on mountains and climate change. And that conference adopted a 10-point declaration calling the UN members, state members, other bilateral organizations, World Bank, ADB, the donor communities for the investment, adequate and the proper financial investment for the mountain communities. And also in 2009, I would like to add that Government of Nepal hosted a cabinet meeting that was also one of the policy decisions in the Kala Pathar, that is the gateway to the Mount Everest, the tallest peak in the world. At the base camp, they hosted a cabinet meeting so that they can draw the attention of the global leaders that how mountains are melting, what is the impact of climate change in the mountain, so that mountain will be included in the COP negotiation, other international processes. So that is how Nepal has been coordinating to raise the agenda. And also I'd like to share you that during 2019, Government of Nepal initiated a platform for the dialogue between the global and the regional stakeholders named as Sagarmatha Sambad. That Sagarmatha Sambad is also named after the Mount Everest, the tallest peak. That Sambad means the dialogue platform in Nepali. So that Sagarmatha Sambad tends to, discuss and deliberate the global issues, emerging crises around the globe. So Nepal was trying to, attract all the global stakeholders to bring in the same platform named as Sagarmatha Samvad, the tallest landmark, which has witnessed a lot of the global changes during the period of time. So government of Nepal initiated that Samvad, but due to the COVID-19, it was held, and the first episode of as the Sagarmatha Samvad was aimed to have discussion on different global and the regional crises. The first event it was supposed was on the climate crisis, and it was intended to bring all the global stakeholders in Nepal. So that was also one of the major policy decisions, but due to the COVID-19, it was not able to happen. So maybe in the near future, it will proceed forward, and it was led by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as it was the matter of bringing all the foreign stakeholders and the delegates, so it was led by the Foreign Affairs. And also the Ministry of Forest and Environment is taken as a focal agency or the focal ministry to deliver the mountain issues and agendas, and also they have designated a focal point to, develop the policies and collect the agendas of the mountain region. So that is how we are trying together, the civil society. Ultimately, it is the role of the government to make the policies. So we are trying to make them accountable to develop the community-friendly, mountain-friendly policies. And on top of that, as we all know that Nepal had celebrated the International Year of Sustainable Mountain Development under the global framework 2022, and we organized a series of events through that framework. And one of the milestone events we organized was in the Mustang, the high mountain range, calling all the partners, not only the partners, but also there was the participation of the community, that how they are facing the impacts of climate change and what could be done at different levels to address the issues. And we raised the voice of the communities over there as well. And the conference adopted a Mustang Declaration. Basically, the key point of the there are declared so many things in different regions, including the mountain women, mountain culture, mountain biodiversity, mountain economy, so many things. But the basic three things I like to highlight related to the policy decision. Government of Nepal, had said that they will initiate to form a Hindu Kush Himalaya HKS Ministerial Council, will form a ministerial council and initiate for that, so that they can deliver the mountain issues and agendas related to climate change, environment and forest. And the next one, the declaration says that it will explore or mobilize the financial resources for the mountain communities which are hardly hit by the climate crisis. And the next one is it will develop the mountain specific policy and priorities to be included. And one of the most interesting thing I like to add on is we are having an election in November 20 in Nepal. So interestingly, all of we are trying to contribute how we can include our agenda in the manifesto of the political parties. And most interestingly, the major political parties, they had highlighted the impact of climate change in the mountain, and they had also, put forward some solutions that if they will from the government, then how they will address the issues. So this is how the policy, had been mainstreaming in the Nepal. Thank you.
Fantastic. Great work there, Panday. Congratulations. What I found very interesting is the way in which the campaigns also the political and the policy spaces and platforms are also carried out in the mountains. So Everest Base Camp and also in the Mustang region, I think that is really important to bring that sort of context and closeness to the issues of the local people that are there. So this is fantastic to see. And it's promising also to hear about the key priorities that have been outlined for policy development going forward, not least given the elections, as you pointed out. And it's great to hear that your work is also being integrated and being part of that. Thank you. And finally, but not least, we have Eric Fongo. And so we'll finish the first round of questions before we move on to a second round of questions. So Eric is the co-founder of the International Center for Environmental Education and Community Development, and has more than 13 years experience in project management, resource mobilization, capacity building in environmental development programs, and contribution to policy consultation, as well as drafting resolutions. He has experience with negotiation within the Global Environment Outlook reports and also expert meetings with specialized agencies of the United Nations and multilateral organizations. So quite a high-level involvement there. Eric, we also have some questions for you, and I would like to start by inviting you to share with us in what ways have mountains been included in policy development in Cameroon in this case.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. I would like to begin by saying that we all know very well that mountains are endowed with natural resources. And when we look at the economics of mountain biodiversity, I think it is one of the reasons why the United Nations declared this year as the International Year of Sustainable Mountain Development, showing the contribution of how mountains can contribute to the sustainable development goal. And if we look keenly very well, with this report from IPCC and the work that Mountain Partnership has done and Mountain Research Initiative, it shows the relevance of mountains in most of our development plans. And when you also look at some of the great initiatives from the United Nations, like the United Nations One Planet Network, the Paris Climate Agreement, I think if there's a possibility that this IPCC report can be included as part of this agenda, is going to go a long way to help us to work in a systematic manner. At the level of Cameroon, because I am coming from Boya, the southwest region in the Mount Cameroon Forest region, where the government of Cameroon have a program in the Mount Cameroon Forest region on the program for sustainable management resources financed by GIZ and the German Development Bank. The government of Cameroon has done a lot of elaboration on the mountain plan, including civil society organization carry out a number of projects like on agroforestry, agroecology, and the design and production of improved cook stove to benefit from some carbon credit. At the level of ICENECDEV, we have carried some micro projects in this particular region, empowering more than 500 women farmers on climate change education using the farmer field school approach. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And it's great to hear the experiences had also with projects that are carried out in Cameroon in the context of mountains. So thank you for sharing that. So that ends the first round of questions. We have a second round of questions for our panelists. Before I also turn to the audience who is present here, in case you would like to also engage in conversation with the panelists. So let me come back to Mirella. A second question for you that we would like to listen to your thoughts on this. How could the scientific community promote data and information sharing? In your context, given the example you gave before, it is clear that there is an engagement with the scientific community as well, but perhaps the scientific community could do also, in addition to that, other things to promote data and information. What would that be? And can you refer to some of the examples from the Instituto de Montaña? Thanks.
Yes, of course, Carolina, thank you. I think the scientific community could work in concrete projects. We had experience some years ago of a Paraagua project. It was water adaptation for water management, where we had a group of scientists developing hydrological modeling, WIP model, in order to help the National Water Authority to plan water resources management, and including a part that incorporates climate change projection as well. This was a very good experience. The Water Authority learned how to work with the model, but of course it has not the tools for establishing the model. And I think this can be a first step in order to go forward to, how you say, mainstream this kind of relations in the public institutions that are the ones that bring sustainability. Because at the moment, there is no room for this kind of relationships. Mostly, governments have their methods to intervene. For example, in Peru, the approach is to close the gaps. It's okay, it works for some things, but how to build this kind of room, it's a question that I think we need to address in order to, because when you go to governments, universities are taking part in climate change councils, for example, regional councils, but how to integrate this in the, in the actions or in the development actions, it's a challenge.
Great, thank you very much for that great example. Indeed, the dialogue and interaction with policymakers and practitioners doesn't end with just simply delivering a product, but how to internalize it and how to operationalize it is also a second step where that engagement is necessary, absolutely. So thank you for highlighting that very important point. Let me now go back to Sam. A second question for you. So what, in your experience, is the added value of transboundary cooperation? This topic came up quite a lot within the evidence we've assessed in the IPCC. And I wonder, how could it be measured in your experience? And how can this support science policy dialogues at national, at international levels? So transboundary cooperation, an interesting concept. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the mountains, they constitute a very good example of actually bringing actors together, because the mountains, not only from the benefits they provide, but also most of the time they are, at the cross border, the boundaries of administrative, different boundaries. So you find that the mountains actually, they are physical structures, but you have people around. So it is very important to have a transboundary cooperation because naturally, these mountains, they don't have the boundaries which are just based on physical features. It is just, it is a natural system. So in terms of cooperation, it is very important to have transboundary cooperation for involving different sectors, not only in terms of the environment, but also the energy, agriculture, different sector, tourism. You need a different sector to cooperate. And when you have a different countries, you needed to have a transboundary cooperation mechanism. And we have very good examples, particularly in the region where I come from, around Rwanda, Uganda, and Congo, DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. There is a transboundary, Greater Virunga transboundary collaboration mechanism, which now is under an agreed treaty by the three countries. And you have some example in other parts of the world, like in the Caucasus in Europe, not far from here, and many other regions. So it is very critical to have this mechanism of collaboration, and the way this can be functional as everything bringing people together is trust and information, sharing, same vision, and the process involved actually is one of the mechanisms which is very, very interesting, particularly in the context of climate change. Because climate change, when it's going to affect the mountain, is not going to focus on one side of the mountain. It is going to affect the whole system. So in terms of managing the adaptation, to have adaptation measures, you need to work together. And by working together, you can have a mechanism which are going to have a bigger impact. And this will need good information. We need joint planning, good vision, and collaboration in the implementation. So we have several examples, but I want to trace also the community part, because it all is not about big dimension in terms of we talk about transboundary collaboration. At the end of the day, it is the communities who are going to be affected, and most of the cases, there are communities who are going to take action to address some of the problems like adaptation, because the communities, they are affected when you have landslides, when you have floodings, when you have a problem for land use, which is affecting the dynamics in the mountains. You need to involve the communities. And so that is why involving stakeholders, different users, different communities is very important in the transboundary collaboration. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that input, Sam. And I liked very much what you mentioned about those key attributes of what that transboundary cooperation should focus on, and that is things like trust and the sharing of information, all around a common interest on shared values and vision and missions as well. These are all important to also sustain that engagement over time, right? That is very important to consider. Thank you very much for that input. Right, now let me turn back to Gita. Our second question for you that we would like to hear your thoughts on. Which types of initiatives and interventions that you're carrying out implemented in mountain communities to promote livelihood options development, build resilience? How do they build resilience? And can you mention some of those key initiatives?
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Carolina. Basically, we are working in the mountain region since last 23 years. And, like KIRAC have a strategy, in the major strategic outcome is to improve the livelihood and the sustainable income of the mountain communities, creating the resilient society, but that society is the just society with the prosperity. We envision that way. So we are working with the mountain communities since long, and we have worked in different thematic areas. And talking about while improving the livelihood, we basically work with the mountain women, because in the mountain region, basically the male, they are migrated to the India or to other Gulf countries for the income earnings and like that. So basically women have a burden of all the responsibilities. So we are empowering women in different areas for improving the livelihood. We are working with them in the areas of anti-FP, the green enterprises promotions, marketing and linkage development with the market. Basically we are working with the medicinal and the aromatic plants, and also the high value agricultural crops, that is the apple, pear, plum. So we are basically improving the livelihood through the green enterprises development, connecting them with the market, and also leveraging the private sector investment. And basically the other area we are working, also building the resilience and improving the livelihood together. We are also mainstreaming the climate resilient agriculture promotion and working on that initiative as well, promoting the agriculture initiatives which are more climate resilient, but we are promoting the indigenous varieties, not introducing the smart varieties which are hybrid. In the longer run, they will impact the mountain ecosystem, but we are promoting the indigenous varieties and improving the agriculture. Basically, we are establishing the seed banks as well, and also establishing the farmers school. And for this, we are, building capacity and giving proper trainings, exposure visit, providing technical support and inputs to the farmers and the women groups so that they could cope and adapt with the situation and also better understand building the resiliency while improving the livelihood as well in the sustainable terms. And linking it with the science and practice, we are basically working with the youths, and we are developing youth champions for the climate change. We call them the climate champions. And the youths, they basically work for awareness raising, and they are collecting the information and data of the climate change through the climate change monitoring diary. That is a system, and they will collect the information at the community level and cooperate with the local government. And the government is also trying to build this climate crisis monitoring report within their system so that in the coming days they can communicate the risk transfer with the communities, with the local farmers. So in that way, the youths are also engaging in the awareness raising through different campaigns, rallies, and awareing the community. Side by side, they are also working in the science part that you had mentioned, linking science with the policy. As the current IPCC report, we are also working on the different parts like establishing the early warning systems, as it is the high risk of landslide in the high mountain, and in the lower plains there is the risk of flood as well. So we are also working in that part. So basically we are working in a collaborative approach together with the community, and besides community we are also providing technical support to the local government so that they can formulate the plans and policies that are basically friendly for the mountain communities, including the risks of the food insecurity and other vulnerabilities that exist in the society besides the climate change inequalities, social discrimination, regional disparities. So we are basically working in that approach so that while improving the livelihood, we don't have to forget the other aspects of resiliency and the just society. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And indeed, there are many interesting aspects you mentioned there about how to sustain that resilience going forward. And I think two very important items you've mentioned here, the gender dimension that you highlight in the work you do. I think that is very key. And of course, the youth involvement. As we know, there's been quite a highlight and input from the youth as well in how we communicate and engage on climate action. So it's great to see that they are also involved in the activities you undertake in the region. So thank you for sharing that perspective. Eric. So we are still here with you. A second question for you would be referring to the work that you do, the programs that you implement. How effective has participatory cooperation with key stakeholders been? Can you describe how you identify the effectiveness of that engagement?
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for that question. I think that the question is just a follow-up from the first question. On what the government of Cameroon has been doing, and the second part on how maybe we have been engaging with them. Firstly, there are a number of ways that the government has put in place for the conservation of mountains. We have the creation of national parks around some mountain forests. We also have the establishment of the Cameroon Mountain Initiative in university, coordinated by the University of Boyard, that we are in process to be part of that initiative. And the government of Cameroon has also signed to the Bond Challenge and the African Union 100 initiative. So our program will be implementing in the Mount Cameroon Forest region. We will be engaging with the Mount Cameroon National Park that carries a number of projects in the Mount Cameroon Forest region in their consultative meetings and in meetings to elaborate the national plan of action of mountain regions, which involve different projects like agroforestry, agroecology, and climate change adaptation. But we have some challenges. We're facing some challenges because the aspect of this carbon credit, which is very new to us. So in a lot of projects that we implement, the climate change dimension was really limited. It was more on socioeconomic development. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you very much. And a very good example in the establishment of a national park is it's a very concrete outcome of that engagement, and the inclusion of climate change considerations as part of that. I think it's very commendable. So this is great to hear. It's already taken place. Right, so we are now with a few minutes left in this session. So we have the opportunity to take some questions from the floor. I hope you're still with us here. We have some roving microphones, so feel free to raise your hand and please introduce yourself and share the question to one of our panelists if you would like. You have a question? Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, please, go ahead.
Is it? Yeah.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you very much for this great presentations. I'm Albertine. I represent delegation of Georgia, and for us, of course, the mountains and high mountains are of great importance. We are also losing a lot of ice surface, glaciers, and I was wondering in terms of like reporting and IPCC guidelines, like how would you look at considering loss of ice into land use and land use change? It just came to my mind that a lot of land would be converted or changed due to ice cover loss. So how would you look at this, for example? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, just very briefly to mention, the special report on the ocean and cryosphere, given the scope and mandate within that report, it was precisely one of the questions that we looked to see to what extent it's been addressed in the evidence. This is still an emerging body of work within the research community. So the amount of evidence is coming through, but we certainly look to see that increasing over the years. There is quite a lot for us to consider as to how landscapes are changing, and this is certainly something that we've highlighted in the reports as being policy relevant as well for governance and for how these regions are developed over the years. So it is a key area of work, and I would expect that this is certainly something that will be reflected in the 7th assessment report, which is already being discussed and likely to be in place in a few years' time. But maybe the colleagues, the panelists, have something to share as well from that perspective, the question about deglaciating landscapes and how that's been addressed. I have Mirella and then Sam. Mirella, please.
Yeah, thank you. Perhaps only to comment that glaciers in the tropics are losing very fast. In a region in Ancash, we have places where the rocks have minerals, and when you expose these rocks long time ago covered by ice to the oxygen, is beginning to react, and acid water is being produced, and this is the source for irrigating pastures, high Andean pastures, and also crops. So we got a problem here. We have already, we are building a solution, a nature-based solution as well. It's like cleaning the water through this, running through the plants, and the plants recovering or keeping the contaminants. It has good results. Water quality is better at the end of the system, and this is running to irrigate the crops. But in some places, it's not only because of water scarcity, it's already a lot, but in addition, this water quality problem is an issue.
Thank you for pointing that out. Absolutely. Sam, do you have a comment also regarding the question posed?
Yeah, thank you. I think it is a very, very good question, and probably which needs more research. But I know one specific study in the Greater Virunga Mountains, which looked at the water level change in different peaks of the chain of the mountains. The result showed that there is the water level has reduced significantly in the mountains surrounded by a lot of land use pressure. So it shows that there is actually a correlation between the land use around the mountain and the water. And I can guess that it can be also the same for the ice on the mountains. But it's an area definitely which needs to be explored more. Because at the end of the day, the mountains, it is one unit, and definitely what you do around there, it is not influenced by, like climate change, which is a global phenomenon, but also what is happening in terms of natural resource management around these mountains. So definitely, it is an area to explore more.
Thank you for your question. A second question here at the front. Yes, please. And please introduce yourself as you pose the question. Thanks.
Hello, thank you. My name is Nanga. I'm from Mongolia. And my question is in terms of go to, I guess, Merela and Geta. What is like the actions do you take into supportive actions, putting the attention on mountain issues? Because in Mongolia we have permafrost and glacier issues. People barely don't pay attention in it. And how do you raise awareness on these kind of topic? And the first question. And the second question is, do you have any suggestions, like Mongolia, a country with like a less populated, fewer people living in these mountain areas, and involving, adapting, and also increasing the resilience of indigenous people in living in mountain areas?
Thank you for your question. Mirella or Pimna?
Okay, just I'd like to respond a few. Basically, the supportive actions to raise awareness about the melting mountains and the glaciers that you raised. Basically, we are working in like the engagement of community, engagement with stakeholders in different tier approach. While working with the communities, basically we are doing some part of capacity building trainings, as I already mentioned, awareness raising rallies, campaigns, and besides that, we are also doing some sort of research, action research in the communities, that how it is affecting them. And besides that, while we are talking about the stakeholders engagement, we are working in a different platform where we bring the community and the stakeholder together, where the communities can put their voices in front of the policymakers, that what are the changes they are facing and what are the actions they need to take forward in terms of, like preserving the mountains and also supporting the communities whose livelihood are depending upon the natural resources based on the mountain, water, forest. So basically we are working in that approach. We are directly working with the community and we are also engaging with the stakeholders in different platforms. We are bringing the voices of the communities so that they can deliberate the issues and agendas and seek the common voices and put forward to the policymakers and the stakeholders so that they could provide some solutions and actions in the coming days. Yeah.
I would like to add, thank you for the question. How to say, communities feel like powerless with all these environment problems. The solution we see is ecosystem-based adaptation, one of them, because ecosystems will be the place where water can be retained. In when glaciers anymore are not available of retaining water anymore. And the other one is ponds, storaging waters. Hydroelectric powers, for example, that works in the region are planning to do more of these ponds. But for small agriculture, you also need small or larger ponds. Also working with the soil as a water reservoir and trying to storage water for the dry period is the way we are working on.
Thank you very much for sharing those concrete examples of that. We have one last question here in the third row, I believe it is. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Mike Moorcroft. I'm also an IPCC author working mainly on ecosystems and ecosystem-based adaptation and contributed to the Mountains paper under Carolina's excellent leadership. I have a question not to Carolina but to everyone else, which is the cross-cutting paper showed that there's very little evidence we can draw on the effectiveness of adaptation measures because there is little monitoring and evaluation. It's a general problem, but I think it's particularly bad in some mountain regions. And I'd like to know if the panel have ideas about how we can improve that for the next report, working perhaps with local and indigenous communities and with practitioners. So monitoring and evaluation, how can we do better?
Great question, Mike, and great to have you also joining this event. Indeed, Mike was a great team member of the Cross-Chapter Paper Mountains. Would anyone like to take the question on monitoring and evaluation? Mirella, please, yes.
Good. Thank you for the question as well. In our project, we are using this effectiveness assessment, an impact and effectiveness assessment. There is a methodology of the IIED, I think it's International Institute for Environment and Development. They published some years ago this effectiveness assessment on EVA measures. One of their main conclusions is that participatory approaches are key for sustainability. For us, we are trying to get a bit deeper, trying not only to measure effectiveness, but why we say that is effective, what impacts is this causing. At the moment, we are on the road for this assessment for our projects. We think we'll be finishing in some 2 or 3 months. Perhaps we can share that also with you.
Thank you. Sam, would you like to share some thoughts on that as well? Thanks.
Yeah, very quickly. I think I mentioned with the first question that ARCOS, in collaboration with UNEP and the Grid Arendor and East African community, we compiled mountain adaptation solutions in East Africa. And actually, as I said, I think we have a very good experiences around. It is a question of going at a grassroots, at a local level, to see what is going on. And our experience was that actually we had to limit the number of case studies, and this was guided by a number of indicators we had set for screening, including things like participation, ownership of actors involved, the scalability for upscaling, and of course the impact and the results in terms of particularly sustainable impact in the results. So I think maybe doing it at a global level to have some harmonized system may be difficult, because the more you increase the scale, then maybe you need to find really an acceptable parameter for everyone, which is not always easy. But otherwise, there are a number of good examples, and I agree with you, it will be good really to have this exercise so that it can guide the decision making at different levels.
Would anyone else like to share any final thoughts on monitoring and evaluation? No? Thank you. Excellent question. Any final questions from the audience? Otherwise, oh yes, you have a question, of course. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much again. I was looking at the issue of transboundary governance, looking at shared risks when it comes to climate and mountain resources. I don't know whether there's an example of a geopolitical issue on that, and also how has it tackled the issue of human-wildlife conflict and farmers' grazer. Thank you.
Could you repeat the question? And who was the question for? Or?
Yes, I was just looking at the human right approach to climate change.
Right.
And when you look at the transboundary governance, there are issues like geopolitics, that is conflict of resources between countries, human-wildlife conflict, and conflicts among glaciers. So I don't know if there's a particular example on that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question. Would anyone of the panelists like to tackle that particular question? Sam, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that is again the heart of the mountain, sustainable mountain development, because the mountains involve different actors, including national actors, transboundary mountains. We have different examples all around the world. And in fact, I think we should see mountains as tools, as a mechanism for peace, as one feature to bring people together, to bring countries together for peace, collaboration, because they can then, when there is this collaboration, they can benefit from the resources and manage the resources for the benefit of the people around. So, of course, we have some transboundary mountain ecosystems where this is not working as it should, but it is not what the mountain should be seen like. So I think my message is more to see mountains as an opportunity to bring people together for peace building and cooperation.
Thank you for that input, Sam. And I would also like to add that indeed issues around climate justice and the human rights approach to not only how we address impacts and risks, but also the adaptation actions that we implement need to absolutely also take that into account, because the transboundary risks are not only associated with the climate impacts, but also how we implement adaptation. It may or may not have also repercussions further downstream or for other communities in an unintended way, and it's important to absolutely consider that. So thank you for raising that very important aspect. And with that, we are coming to the end of this session, and I would like to conclude by inviting all of the panelists here to share one final reflection. We have an amazing and unique opportunity right here at COP27, where we have the chance to also interact with many negotiators and also members from civil society organizations and others who feel very strongly about climate change and addressing the climate change urgency. So we have here a great chance to also transmit and share what are some of the key priorities that we would like to see this community address right here in Sharm el-Sheikh. So in closing, would like to invite each of you to perhaps give one takeaway message or sentence or message that you would like to share with the audience that is here today. May I start first with the end of the road, with Eric, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I am also happy that one of the authors is here, as guiding us. When I read that report, the report looks very complex. Yes, it was very, very complex. So my suggestion is that when you look very well at the report, there are issues on food system, food security, and the IPCC is already part of the UN system, and it's not good for us to operate in silos. I think 3 months ago, we had a meeting in Japan between the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. So for this report maybe to sink down then to the community, to the national level, I think that they should establish a platform or a meeting between the IPCC, the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goal, and the One Planet Network, so that we can have a systematic resolve mountains that can help us in our countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent recommendation there. Mirella, would you like to share your thoughts?
I think most vulnerable people in the world to climate change, as the report also says, are the ones, the farmers and the pastoralists, the people that grow animals. So I don't know, it's very good mitigation, adaptation, carbon efforts and all of that, but I think action should be concentrated to reduce the impacts on the on livelihoods of these most vulnerable people. That's what I say.
Thank you, Mirella.
I think building partnership, networking and collaboration is the must, and we should regularly keep on talking, dialogue and interaction with the government, particularly to put forward our agenda, and the private sector for the investment of the communities who are being marginalized and vulnerable because of the impacts of the climate change. And not only with the government, private sector, but also we have to talk with the media, as media is also one of the important actor in all the development process. So we need to build strategic partnership, networking and collaboration, and keep on talking and influencing the policymakers, advocating for the mountain communities. And we need to create the space for the civil society as well in the different forums for the sustainable mountain development, not only for the development, but we need to talk about the solutions for the communities in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you for those thoughts. Sam, would you like to share yours?
Yeah, thank you. As my final remarks is that the change takes time, and we don't have time to act in the mountain ecosystems because they are most vulnerable, and we can see the cases all over the world affecting communities and these mountains. But at the same time, action is critical. So while we are calling for investment in the mountains, action is also important. It is very important to act at different levels, and I'm going to focus on young people and schools, because ARCOS, we have a program on eco schools, which is implemented in Rwanda. Rwanda is a country of 1,000 hills, mountains, very vulnerable. So we see disasters affecting livelihoods of people in terms of floods, erosion, and you name it. And it is very important to engage, to make a change at different levels, from high level, like Rwanda has made a commitment of 80% of national territory to be restored. Rwanda is a small country, but almost everywhere the commitment is that by 2030, the land has to be restored, because the deterioration, land loss, erosion is affecting everyone. So we have a program also, not to work with the adults, the communities. We have a program involving 30,000 households, but we work also with the schools under the eco-school program, so we prepare the future generations. And it is very interesting to see how, when you look at the harmony in nature, how nature itself is so, everything is built up in harmony. But the humans, we are there to destroy this harmony. In nature, everything depends on each other. They can stay for many, many years. And this is what we want to, through the harmony in nature, to take the children to admire the harmony in nature and to see how people can live together in harmony, but also how people can take care of nature and the environment, because the environment is, by working in harmony, is helping people, but we need also to learn from this harmony and help nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. And with that, we conclude this session and also the opportunity to listen to the panelists share their thoughts about how to engage in a science policy and multi-stakeholder dialogue that goes beyond the IPCC, but also engages local communities from the different mountain regions that are also represented here through this panel. One thing that I would like to also highlight and close with is, as Sam mentioned in his earlier intervention, indeed this year, 2022, is a very special year for the mountain community, not least given the opportunity for us to observe the International Year for Sustainable Mountain Development as proclaimed by the UN General Assembly last December. So as an outcome of the year and the opportunity we've had to highlight mountains at this conference as well, we have quite a lot, in fact, to do as an outcome, as I said, of this year moving forward to ensure that we focus a lot more on implementation and action, and indeed engage in the monitoring and evaluation of how effective that engagement and action on the ground is in reducing not only the impacts of climate change in mountains, but also enhancing the prospects for climate resilient development in these regions. And with that, I thank you all very much for being with us and engaging at this session, and also for those of you who have joined us online, very thanks to you also for joining us virtually. So thank you very much, and all the best for the remaining tasks ahead of us here at this COP. Thank you.
Thank you.
check mic 1 2. Check mic 1 2. ايوه في حاجه في النص مش من عندنا. احمد الصوت بيطلع عندك على الليفت صح؟ check mic 1 2. hello check hello check mic. اللي جاي من عندك انت؟ ما هو بص انا مطلع قوي مديني الراك وهو موزع بقى الدنيا من الراك.